This is Dan Schneider on this Dan Schneider video interview. The subject is the decline of DVD commentaries. I have two experts on the matter, and the conversation will begin in a moment. The subject is the decline of DVD commentaries and their place in cultural history at the turn of the century. I have Aaron Barlow and Andrew Egan to speak about it. Andrew Egan can only be with us for about half the show, so I'll probably focus a little bit more on him while he's here and then go into more depth with Aaron for the bulk of the show at the end. But Aaron, you are on the left. Let me just ask you if I can, you can give a 2 or 3 minutes background to yourself, what you've written about DVDs, and your idea of their place in cultural firmament.
Well, I look at DVDs as one step in a progression of home viewing of movies that really began in the 1920s with things like the Kodak 16mm system and the Pathé Bébé, a 9.5mm system there that has continued through the DVD and now into streaming and on-demand video, which has changed the way we view movies at home, certainly quite a bit, and certainly quite a bit since I wrote about that 12 years ago when I wrote about the
DVD. Andrew, if you could give a little background about yourself and what you've written about DVDs and their decline.
Sure, yeah. I'm a writer based in New York now, and I've been writing about a variety of cultural topics, and DVDs came up in the sort of the format switching as we move over from physical media into streaming and digital. Things are lost along the way, and that loss was something that was very much of interest to me, and that was sort of how I got into the topic of DVD commentaries, very specifically DVD commentaries. With home viewing and entertainment, there's a lot to cover, but with the decline of DVD commentaries, I thought it was a perfect example for the sort of cultural gems that we lose when we switch formats.
I'm going to spend the second half of the show speaking with Aaron to put DVD commentaries in sort of a historical perspective with things that came before and things that have passed away, like how radio gave into television or silent films gave into sound films. But let me focus a bit more just on the turn of the century till now with both of you, and Andrew a little bit more. Andrew, you wrote in a blog called Tedium about the switch of formats, and I look at, say, the years maybe 1998 to 2010, 2012 as sort of the heyday of DVD commentaries. You could buy the crappiest film, but if you had a good commentary, whether it was entertaining or whether it was really deeply informative, that would make the purchase worth it. It seems nowadays, even with leading companies like Criterion, or there are some companies like Kino, I think it might be based in Europe, they don't even offer commentaries anymore. Is it just an economics thing, do you think, Andrew, or has the culture moved away from that, or is the technology just not there with streaming?
You know, it's interesting because it's one of these things where I think what's been revealed, the technology has made it more apparent that in all likelihood, it was a very small group of people who consumed DVD commentary in the first place. With all three major streaming services, Hulu, Amazon, Netflix, have all tried have tried commentary. Obviously, it's not DVD commentary at this point, but they've tried commentary on some of their hallmark productions. House of Cards, Transparent, I believe The Handmaid's Tale with Hulu. They tried commentary, and more so than any other technology in the past, they were able to see who was actually using it. And the results clearly were not that high. If you go to House of Cards on Netflix now and try and watch it with David Fincher's commentary about the first episode that he directed, it can't be found. So the issue here isn't necessarily that the sites can't do it. It's just that, in large part, I think the vast majority of consumers aren't that interested. It's the commentary has almost always been left to the scholars and the geeks, and making them widely available especially for securing rights to pre-existing commentary, would economically, it just wouldn't make a lot of sense for Netflix or the streaming services because a very small market is actually consuming them.
I saw you nodding, Aaron. You concur?
Yeah, I think that's right to a great degree. The commentaries were developed in the first place because people who were producing the DVDs wanted to differentiate them from the videotapes that had come before, and so it really was a marketing feature. And they didn't really care so much who watched them, and that's a huge change in the streaming services, where they know who's watching and they are attuned to more immediately to what consumers are doing with the material than the producers of DVDs were.
Do you think that it's all commentaries, or, for example, like Mystery Science Theater sort of pioneered the sort of hilarity, the cynical comment, and you have things like riff tracks. Has riff tracks fared any better than straight commentary from the producer and the director?
It's strange. Riff tracks specifically came up. Riff tracks and Mystery Science Theater very much came up, and that's sort of unique in and of its own, because there's no real insight into the movie itself. So it's commentary, but it's not the same kind of commentary we're looking for. It's entertainment in its own right.
Yeah.
So it's been somewhat successful. The numbers from Riff Tracks, when I contacted them to ask, they have like one full-time employee. So this is not a major operation that is keeping a little cottage industry of just people watching movies and commenting on them. That unfortunately doesn't seem like it's happening.
Aaron?
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that, but I think Andrew's right.
Let me just talk, because I want to get some of the major points here before Andrew has to go. Let me just talk about the economics of producing a commentary. Back during what I said was the golden age, let's just say it was the first decade of this century of commentaries, you'd get the Roger Eberts, you'd get a lot of the, I don't know if Rex Reed ever did, but a lot of the New York critics, or you'd get people who wrote books like you, Aaron, who would comment on classic films, the Casablancas, the Citizen Kanes, the Hitchcocks, etc. Was it ever really an economically feasible thing, or was it just something that was easily put into a DVD under the $29.95 price? Let me start with you, Andrew.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of interesting because the availability of DVD commentary specifically on that format came from an outgrowth of just things that happened in production. Behind the scenes, making of, et cetera, when you're spending your time setting up shots and, getting the scene, the set correct, to film, there's a lot of downtime between, the actors, the cinematographers, the various people. So initially, these featurettes, the behind the scenes stuff, sort of just came organically from it. And so there was always these, extra features and scenes and things about a movie that were never really intended to be seen, but through things like conventions, fan meetups, these things would get sort of transferred and moved around, and then suddenly you had a lot of interest in things not necessarily about things that are behind the movie. So with that sort of interest happening already, rather organically, the mid-'80s is where we see the first commentary that we see in a home viewing format. The very first version of it was, of course, on Laserdisc, and it was the Criterion release collection of King Kong. So it makes complete sense that almost immediately when people realized they could do this, they did. So it started off as something like, well, we know that people are interested in these behind-the-scenes things. They really would like to think about their movies a little more critically and a little more in depth. And then when it sort of became available, they just were able to sync it up. And with that said, let's be fair, DVD commentary for the most part isn't that expensive. Where it gets expensive is who's doing the commentary.
Yeah.
Because the first for DVD commentary, or the first commentary overlaid for a movie, being King Kong, it was actually provided by a film professor. So this was somebody who, at the first opening lines of his commentary, noting that this is a historical moment, that this is the first time it had been used in this particular manner. And so it's that natural outgrowth of, we know there's interest in behind-the-scenes things. We have the technology. Let's just go ahead and do it. But, in the heyday of sort of DVD commentary, you would have had to put aside the time for Julia Roberts, Ben Affleck, the big-name people who are incredibly expensive to sit down for 2 hours and, overlay for a movie. That's where things got expensive. And otherwise, it's just a recording studio.
Well, when they do actor commentaries, isn't it part of their contract, if they were going to do that they'd have to do it?
Depends. Nowadays, especially during the heyday, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Nowadays, Kevin Spacey isn't required to do commentary for House of Cards. There was no way that was ever going to be in his contract. And the same thing with a lot of people. It's just needs dictated by production companies and studios about their marketing materials. And over time, I think they just started to realize, well, it's a neat feature. If it costs us nothing to add it, okay. But, now we've moved away from physical media and we're into a new realm where people aren't necessarily as interested.
Aaron?
Yeah, I think that's really true. There's another aspect of it, and that is that the commentaries were part of the package of DVD extras, the added material that you would get that would include, outtakes, bloopers, all sorts of different things that could be added, and this provided a full package that hadn't been possible before, and also that superseded earlier media and often earlier DVD releases. So somebody who's buying, say, Blade Runner could end up having 4 different DVD packages of Blade Runner with different things, director's cut, this, that, or the other thing on it, and these, when you're marketing just the films through streaming or any sort of online service, becomes sort of useless in terms of marketing, so they're dropped. And unfortunately, I think it's a huge loss to see the death of the DVD commentary. But maybe technologies keep changing. Maybe there will be a new place for a commentary that we're not aware of.
I would also like to add that a lot of those behind those DVD extras still exist on YouTube. They're readily accessible. Yes. They're things that people watch and enjoy. Basically find a blooper reel for any popular TV show. They've got several hundreds of thousands of views each. What makes DVD commentary or audio commentary overlaid on a movie particularly complicated, or at least difficult to access, is that you have to sync it.
Yeah.
This isn't, it's not like you can just find the commentary for the 1998 Criterion Collection release of Armageddon, which, by the way, is one of the greatest things you can ever listen to. Ben Affleck just deciding to tell the truth about what it was like to work with Michael Bay and Jerry Bruckheimer on this ridiculous film. And he is honest. Bruce Willis also records commentary for that particular scene, for that movie. And he's very diplomatic about it. Of course, everybody was so professional on set, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Ben Affleck's telling the story about the time Bruckheimer told him to shut the fuck up because he was questioning the premise of the film. So you get these really gem moments that are worth listening to on their own, trying to find that isolated audio and then play Armageddon just somewhere on Netflix or whatever, and then try and sync those two up. It's going to be really difficult. So unless there's a a service itself that is providing that, like the streaming services, we're going to see those things weirdly go away, while other sort of relics of the era are still going to have a home.
Well, let me just ask: is the technology there now, and do you think that a Netflix or Hulu-like service, call itself FilmCommentary.com or something, could be a streaming service that will only provide? Maybe they have a contract with Warner Brothers. We'll do commentaries on Warner Brothers films, but you can't watch the film without, you can't mute the commentary, that kind of thing. Do you think that might be?
The technology is undoubtedly there.
Mm-hmm.
But, in these instances, what we're now talking about is basically the same issues that Hulu and Netflix and Amazon Prime are running into, is that it's licensing. The technology is there, but suddenly you'd have to go through to each studio and figure, oddly enough, studio, like the mergers, acquisitions, like their consolidation, actually makes this a little easier in a few different ways. Because, if you got licensing for all of Disney's commentary and films and were able to apply that to all streaming platforms, you take away, you hit a pretty sizable percentage of all films released at this point. The technology is there. It's just the licensing issues for this particularly obscure, not necessarily profitable form of media. But there is always a value to it for, basically guys like us, people who obsess over movies.
Aaron?
Well, I think that the whole question goes to the expanse of, it's something that you said earlier, that a lot of these things, the extras are available on YouTube or other places. We have so much more available now online than we had even 10 years ago. And at one point, the information with a commentary was unique almost. You look at the commentary to a film like Once Upon a Time in the West, and you're not going to find Bertolucci talking about that film in the same way elsewhere, and especially with the film and tied to the film. But we now have so many possibilities, so many things that we can look at, that these have diminished in importance just because of the explosion of information.
And I'd like to add that while there's a certain degree of academic sort of interest or information that it might be lost as these things go away, one thing that I think we also miss out on is the sheer entertainment value that some of these commentaries really add. Robert Downey Jr.'s character in Tropic Thunder, for example, makes a throwaway line that I don't drop character until I'm done with the DVD commentary. Well, if you listen to the DVD commentary of Tropic Thunder, he's doing it in character. Mm-hmm. Right? So, those are these there are a couple of people who decided to approach it as another form, like an extension of the work. This Spinal Tap, I want to say the 10-year DVD re-release, they got back together, did the DVD commentary in character. I mean, that was as close to a sequel to This Is Spinal Tap as you'll ever get. And it's, basically just the characters getting back together to rewatch their own movie. So, you definitely had entertainment value that you'll see slowly go away, and along with the, I guess, academic importance of the information that was in a lot of these. Well,
I want to ask two main questions before you go, Andrew, and I'll expand on them more with Aaron later. But the first question is, there are some filmmakers, most notably someone like Woody Allen and Steven Spielberg, who refuse to have ever done DVD commentaries. Do you think that part of the reason that DVD commentaries are a niche field is that there are people who are film goers or watchers that feel that way too, or do you think that doesn't make a difference?
I mean, if people like Spielberg or Woody Allen are refusing to do something, it tends to signal to other people that it's not worth their time. But again, I think so much of these extra features, and commentary is a little different because you generally have to get somebody into a studio in order to record it. But so many of these things are like outgrowths of just being on set with a couple hundred people who've got cameras and microphones. I mean, they've got a rough cut of the movie. Like, what does it take to show it to somebody and record their reactions as they're speaking? It's not much. It's just the extent to which people want to engage with the form. And again, I do generally just think that it will. Commentary has always been kind of a geeky, thing for the fans, like the real honest God fans. That as technology revealed that it wasn't as needed, or as the interest wasn't as high, that basically it just started falling to the wayside.
Aaron?
Yeah, I think that's what happened to it. It was something that could be useful when it was no longer useful, when it was no longer a selling point, because it only attracted a small group of fans. It did fall to the wayside. It wasn't something that could be used, and it wasn't something that could become integral to the text itself, which is, I think, part of the things that Spielberg and Alan objected to. Now, you go back to the initial publication of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner 200 years ago. It didn't have Coleridge's notes with it, but people said they couldn't understand it, so he put those in, and then those do become part of the text as a whole. There's not a way to do that with the DVD commentary, because it does replace the soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
You can't run at the same time. So I don't know what will happen. I would like to see them. It takes somebody then who really knows the film to listen to the commentary. You can't just have seen a film once, really, even, and listen to it.
Yeah, well, it's true, because it's sort of like if you read The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, that's sort of him just sort of, massaging himself. And you get a lot of these commentaries, you might call it just film fellatio, like he was saying, oh, this person was so wonderful, wonderful, everyone's wonderful, even if it's a bomb, even if it's a terrible film.
Yeah.
But that brings me to my other major question, and then I'll just end and give Andrew a few minutes to comment before he goes. There seem to be, in my opinion, sort of three basic types of audio commentaries for films. There's the star, or the people who are doing the commentary, sort of riffing on it, having fun, just not taking it that seriously. And then there's sort of the serious historian who will who will just sort of read monotonously from his notes about. And in 1931, Bogart was approached about blah, 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 and seems oblivious to what's going on screen. And then, to me, the best commentaries, Roger Ebert, before he lost his voice, was a good commentary guy, because he did history, and he also brought a little bit of criticism, whether you agreed with him or not. I know, Andrew, in your Tedium piece, you list 5 basically of the first sort of commentaries, sort of fun commentaries or whatnot. So let me ask before you go, what commentaries, or what commentarians, to use a noun, who are some of the best in the classic age? The Roger Eberts I would put up there. Who, if you could name 2 or 3 of the best, if you wanted to know about a film, its background, the actors, and whatnot, who would you put up there as the serious?
It's interesting, because I think there's like a fourth category here that I find, especially for film buffs, particularly useful. It's the commentary from the background production staff.
Yeah.
It's the set designers, the costume designers, the cinematographer.
And oftentimes you'd get the star commentary and then the background people commentary on the big.
Yeah, exactly. And in that background commentary, you find that's the minutia. There's one of the set designers for Blade Runner does an overview. I can't remember his name. Of course, he's got an iconic name, and I can't remember it either. But he does a full commentary on what it's like to design Blade Runner, like that world, this dripping neon, wet noir Los Angeles. and those are, I think, where you find some of the most useful things, especially if you want to be involved in film. The number of times where in the overlay for Quentin Tarantino's commentary for Pulp Fiction. He's sort of interesting because obviously he's a star director in his own right, but he's going to approach this very much as here's how I made this movie, and in the process you learn things like how they filmed the needle stab scene. They actually filmed it in reverse. You learn that basic fact because Tarantino tells you it in the commentary, and so they're very much these real. Actually, Quentin Tarantino probably has to be one of the best film commentary people I think alive. Now that I think about it, him and Edgar Wright watching Hot Fuzz together is just an explosion of obscure film references. It's amazing. So I'll definitely give it. If you can see the set design, or if you can listen to the set design commentary for Blade Runner, that's amazing. Or pretty much any background production staff for any iconic movie, and then Quentin Tarantino, because he tends to fill in both. So for those two, I definitely say. Yeah.
Aaron, who would you, if you could pick 2 or 3 film scholars or filmmakers or film critics that have given the best commentaries over, and let's qualify, say they had to have done at least 2, more than 1 commentary.
I don't know if I can really answer that. I agree about Tarantino, because to me the most interesting of the commentaries have not been from film scholars, certainly, and have been from the more minor people, or when you have a group of people doing the commentary and talking as the film's being shown. Now, sometimes that gets really off track and just stupid.
Yeah.
But other times you can really learn something from it. I find those to be the most interesting. It's not so much the personalities, except for somebody with the type of knowledge that Tarantino has of movies in general, but the seeing a little bit more behind the scenes, how the film is made, what is coming up here, what to look for, and different people will point out at different points in a commentary different things that they focus on, which I think makes it a lot more fascinating than just having a film scholar. Now, Roger Ebert, of course, was able to do quite a bit more than most people could with their commentaries, but
and why was that? Because he was Roger Ebert, that he had more access, people were willing to give him more information?
No, he had his knowledge of film was encyclopedic, and so he could bring in a lot more than other people could.
Okay.
Plus, he was a pretty well-known TV personality. Like he's already comfortable speaking with people and giving them his thoughts on movies in a clear, distilled form. So yeah, I mean, it's a natural for commentary.
Well, let me just wrap up here and give Andrew a few minutes, and then I'll continue with Aaron. I said Andrew has to go. So Andrew, if you could take us 3 or 4 minutes and I guess give your opinion on the state of film commentary generally, and if there's a future for it.
Yeah. So I think the future for commentary. I think you'll see it still with film. Why wouldn't you? It doesn't take a whole lot. As long as physical packaging exists, as long as there are the commemorative versions of things, I think we'll still have commentary. But I think if we really have a future for the form, it's probably going to be in TV. And the reason why I say that is because this is very anecdotal, but if I would have to venture, the most popular DVD commentary, the one most likely to be seen by the average person, I think, is the commentary from Friends, the DVD collection and series. And I've listened to it. It's pretty great. They don't do it for every episode, and the episodes they do it for, it's actually Bright, Kaufman, and Crane, the 3 executive producers of the show. So you don't get any of the primary cast telling you what it was like on set. What you get are the producers talking about, okay, here's how we wrote this iconic episode of Friends. And I think the places where we'll find continued commentary over, over like a show is probably going to come from TV, and it's going to be in things that are eminently rewatchable.
Yes,
So
I think that's the key, is the rewatchable.
I think that is 100%. Yeah, you mentioned that earlier, and I 100% agree with you. There are people who there are various subreddits for they like fill in a show sleepers, and it's basically people who fall asleep to specific shows. The Office, Parks and Recreation, Friends, Futurama. You can keep on going, and these are exactly the kind of people who would listen to a DVD commentary over any number of things that they watch. So the future of DVD commentary is going to be in the media that is the most rewatchable.
Well, let's take a break here since Andrew has to go. I'll continue on with Aaron. Andrew, I'll link to, you have a blog called Crimes in Progress. I'll link to that, I guess. And I want to thank you then for taking some time and speaking about it. And we'll continue on with Aaron when we get back. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you guys for having me.
Okay. Continuing on solo with Aaron Barlow, let's take a little bit of a U-turn then, since we talked when Andrew was here mostly about the last 15, 20 or so years of commentaries, but I want to go back a little bit more broadly about DVDs and the history of mediums that have come and gone. You have a book that I will link to the Amazon page called The DVD Revolution, Movies, Culture, Technology. It looks like it was released in 2004. And the interesting thing is things turn around so fastly that, in a sense, that book is almost outdated since it seems
Absolutely,
to be
it is.
heralding things. What was the main thrust of that book, first of all?
Well, it really should have been called a history of home viewing of movies.
Yeah.
Although the last half of the book does have quite a bit on the DVD commentaries.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to look at things like Cinémathèque Française and other ways that movies were brought into the home. And I think that's fascinating, even with television and the ways that movies were brought in a way, kicking and screaming into television. The studios didn't want them there, but people like Gene Autry, who owned their own films, were able to sell them to the TV stations for viewing, and eventually, of course, with Saturday Night at the Movies, they did start to become a regular part of network television. But the movies have always had this sort of dichotomy between the theater and the home, and that goes back to the 1920s. And the changes in technology, I think, have changed the way we've interacted with movies, and they continue to do so. So in a way, that book was really describing something at a point in time. I thought then that the discrete nature of the DVD would continue, that we wouldn't be willing just to stream movies, but that we would be wanting to own them and have them. But that didn't prove to be the case. Now we don't care if we have a physical object.
Do you think that's related to, for example, the music industry, where we used to have what was called album-oriented rock from the late 60s till a decade or so ago, and now the single has come back with the ability to stream? Do you think there's a correlation?
There probably is, and I think that would be a very interesting thing to explore. The questions of, okay, if we're not owning the object any longer, what do we want from it? Why would we want all of the songs, say, on an album, if we're not going to be listening to it anyway? We're only going to be listening to individual tracks.
And Andrew, when he was here, had mentioned that the first DVD commentary was from the Criterion Collection. And in any conversation about DVDs, the format, or commentaries, certainly you have to speak about Criterion. And Criterion sort of pioneered, I guess you might call, the high-minded approach to films. They suppose, I mean, he mentioned Armageddon, and there are some real clunkers that they've had, especially I think in the last decade, as they have sort of run out of some classic films, and now they're making a lot of things seem like they were classic. My wife was just talking, I think, The Breakfast Club, which was a good, solid movie, but I wouldn't put it up there with the all-time films. I think she said that she saw that that's either had recently gotten a Criterion treatment or not. Criterion seems to have been the first company that seemed, in my mind, to shift away from the commentaries, and this was maybe about 08, 09. They seem to have gotten rid of them. Now, Criterion isn't a studio. They started out, as far as I know, as a company that was trying to, the Janus films, they get a lot of the foreign films. They would try to, restore films and whatnot.
Right, preserve film.
Yeah, a lot of their early DVDs show the difference between the original, the original cut,
Yes.
not the original tape or whatnot, and things that they did. Do you think that was Criterion anticipating the move away from commentaries, do you think? Or do you think that when they abandoned it, everyone said, well, if they're not doing it, why are we doing it?
I think that they, at that point, they had recognized with everybody else that this wasn't a selling point any longer, that this wasn't going to help them any longer. There's a lot with Criterion that's a little bit problematic. Their attitudes towards, as you were saying, certain movies and certain choices has always bothered me a bit, in that they can make something into a classic just by having it in Criterion, but plenty of other movies that are just as interesting from some other times that haven't been restored or haven't been looked at could be just as worthy as any of the choices that they have made. And I think the choices they were making for a long time were based on film scholars, on people who could do commentaries and what could be done with the things, what they saw as interesting in the background of the movies, as much as with the aesthetics. And in a way, getting rid of the DVD commentary may free them up to just concentrate on the movies themselves and not all the extras, which so long seemed to be a necessary part of what they were doing.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was just trying to look up, was forgetting who did the original La Dolce Vita, which is Fellini's great 59 film. There was a 2-disc package that came out in the early O's, and I was trying to look up who did it. It wasn't Criterion, and then Criterion redid it, and frankly, Criterion's wasn't up to the original 2-disc version that was put out by a different company. Do you think that, for example, I mean, I've always been, for example, a person who much preferred good dubbing in foreign films than subtitles, and I know a lot of people prefer subtitles but I've always been of the mind, I don't want up to a third of my screen bothered with text, especially if, let's say, if you look at the classic Fellini or the classic Bergman films, where you have pretty good actors doing the commentary. Do you think, for example, that that's another issue that is sort of related to commentaries, is that a lot of people, especially when it comes to foreign films that or whatnot, that people just want the film themselves? Do you think there's any correlation between the subtitling or dubbing versus commentaries, that people just don't want these add-ons?
I think that a lot of people don't want the add-ons. I think it is interesting, though, that one of the ways that I always watched DVD commentaries was with subtitles in English, so that I could keep up with the dialogue of the film even while I'm listening to the commentary.
Yeah, me too.
But one thing that you said about the dubbing, though, and this is why I'm not a big fan of dubbing, is most of the time the people who are doing it are second-rate.
Yeah.
And you see this in particular with a lot of the dubbings of Japanese anime movies.
Well, yeah, I grew up on Godzilla, so I know about bad dubbing.
Yeah. And something like The Princess Mononoke, I much prefer watching that with subtitles than watching it dubbed. They don't do a good job with the characters and the voices, and this is often the case, unfortunately.
Yeah, but it should be said, too, that there's a lot of bad subtitling, too. I've watched, for example, original subtitles of especially films from the 60s or 70s, what would have been called Eurotrash films. And then I've seen what they call new and improved subtitles on DVDs. And sometimes I've seen them side by side comparison. And subtitling can lose you just as bad. I mean, you may not like the desynchronization of the voices, but if someone is saying, "Oh, hello, Mr. Yamamoto," and really she's saying, "I hate your guts, Mr. Yamamoto," you've lost something. But let me get back then. I said to put this in a historical context. Do you think that the fading away, at least now in 2017 as we record, the fading away of the DVD or the film audio commentary is similar in a way to the transition between, as I mentioned, silent and sound film, the transition between radio and television, or film and television, or even the CD and vinyl thing that happened? Because we've seen vinyl records now make a comeback, which I've always found odd, because even though I'm not an expert on it, I've often been like, yeah, but I do remember that kind of humming sound that vinyl had that CDs got rid of, and yet people seem to now like that. So do you think this is just a part of a historical trend, that we get something, it lasts for a couple of decades or whatnot, and then fades away, and then maybe in 2040 commentaries, people will be looking back at the great commentaries of the turn of the century here with a kind of nostalgia?
I think that's probably going to happen. That seems to happen with every, as you were saying, with almost every technology. When I was a kid in the 60s and the radio comedies had disappeared, there was already nostalgia for them.
Yeah.
Fibber McGee and Molly, even though we never heard it, was something that we knew about. And I think that that's what will happen too with the DVD commentary. And then technologies will change, and there'll be a new way of utilizing them that'll appear, and there will be a resurgence of them of some sort. And probably too, of the ones that people will select out the ones from the, as you said, the golden age of DVD commentary for particular note.
In your look at DVDs, do you know that there were any sort of controversial commentaries, i.e. where a star or a director or even a historian or critic somehow gave out wrong information that became what might be called now urban legends about a film or about an actor, that there was any kind of backlash? Because, I'm thinking of what was it, the Blair Witch kind of thing. They used that kind of online marketing where they pretended it was a real film, and now just less than 2 decades later, that seems an ancient technique. Are there any famous commentaries where there were great gaffes that you know of historically, where misinformation was promulgated?
None that I can think of, and I think the reason for that is, frankly, what we were speaking of earlier when Andrew Egan was here, that not that many people watched them.
Yeah.
And it was only the people who were very much interested in the films who watched them at all. Yeah. And they may have become famous for 5 minutes within a small group of people, but it certainly wasn't going to become something of interest to the general public.
Yeah, the reason I ask, I recall on the DVD commentary to the Great Western Shane, I forget who was doing it. I think it was a historian or a scholar. He was talking about that there had been some controversy over the ending of the film that came because some TV show mentioned that Shane, they thought, dies at the end of the film, whereas you see him sort of riding over the canyon out of the Grand Tetons where it was filmed, and he sort of slumped on his horse, and apparently some TV show had claimed in a comics vein that Shane actually dies at the end of the film, and he went on about that. So I was just wondering if there was any kind of misinformation like that.
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there's lots of it. But that's going to take, again, probably a revival of interest in the DVD commentary for people to start going through it and looking at that. An argument could be made in Shane, as he is wounded as he rides off, that he's purposely leaving because he knows he's dying. But I think it would be hard to argue that he actually does die there. And I think I vaguely remember that too.
Do you think that some of the big studios have an opportunity in terms of marketing? I think because I know they were about a decade ago they came out with like Warner Brothers had some gangster releases where they'd have 7 or 8 gangster films, Jimmy Cagney, Bogart, all that together, and they would release a whole schmear of films like that. Do you think that's a way to get people interested in film culture again? A year or so ago, I did a show called The Loss of America's Film Culture, because I was born in '65, and I remember even in the early to mid '70s as a kid, the independent theater owners would let us kids come in and clean the theater for them, and then they would in the morning screen old Bugs Bunny or old Jason and the Argonauts films to pay back the kids and whatnot. And so you'd have in New York, where I grew up, you'd have in the morning there'd be old kids films from the old cans they have. From noon to midnight, there'd be the main features, and overnight they'd have the porno. Do you think that a part of the film culture, DVDs can tap into that same kind of vein with old films, and also with these commentaries that bring back this lost film culture?
Well, that's a very interesting question, especially in New York when you look at a place like Film Forum, which is trying to do something akin to DVD commentaries by bringing in people who are associated with the movies to talk about the movies. And there's a real hardcore following at Film Forum that goes over and over again and will look at the movies that way. But this is now very rare. You're right. For a long time, you were finding bars that would show movies once or twice a week, and classic films. Or you would see a film like Harold and Maude shown there, and it wouldn't be in the regular theaters at all. And there was a whole culture that built around it. We've lost that. If there becomes a way to build that again, or that a place like Film Forum could use to build something beyond just the showing of the films and inviting even stars or other people. I saw Marnie Nixon talk about dubbing soundtracks there, but it's going to have to be much more than just the live things there. They're going to have to record those and make those available. They're going to have to make this happen. They would have to use a lot more online possibilities.
Well,
I don't think anyone's doing that yet.
Well, let me ask and bring this out, though. Do you think, in a sense, that there may be some other issues other than technological issues that have resulted in the decline of film commentaries? And I'm thinking recently, David Mamet, the filmmaker and playwright, recently declared he didn't want any commentaries or these after the play, speaking with the stars. He was gonna, if he found out that anyone was doing that, if any director or stage manager or whatnot was having question and answer, he was going to fine the theater $25,000. And I looked it up just the other day in preparation for this show, and it seemed that a lot of it was about 50-50. A lot of playwrights seem to support him. They don't have the clout of Mamet to make a big stink about it. Do you think that there's a backlash, as I mentioned about the Woody Allen and Spielberg not wanting to accommodate, that there's a backlash to this indulgence of extra diegetic commentary on the work of art itself?
I think it's broader even than that, but that's a part of it. Samuel Beckett, also his plays, it stipulated before he died that they never be performed in any way but exactly to his specifications.
Mm-hmm.
No changes in sets, no anything else. And then we get things like there was a production of the Glass Menagerie a year or so ago on Broadway that changed the play quite a bit. It didn't do that well. And of the Gershwin's brothers girl crazy, became crazy for you with different songs and different things. But what is the responsibility to the integrity of the original?
Mm.
This is an important question, but it goes to who owns the thing. Is a work of art really, does that belong just to the creators, or does it belong to the people who watch it?
Mm.
How much is it theirs as well? And you could even expand that to looking at the difference between the bands, the Grateful Dead and Metallica, and whether people were allowed to record their shows. The Grateful Dead encouraged it. Metallica really stamped down on anybody doing that.
Yeah.
And
yet the odd thing about Metallica was they indulged that very same mind of this extra diegetic interest in them with their somewhat, was it something like a monster film? I mean, that's basically Spinal Tap in real life almost.
Yes. Yeah. But they wanted to control. They wanted to be in control, and the way that George Lucas wants to be in control, or wanted to be, of the fan fiction related to Star Wars.
Yeah.
Who owns these things? I think it should be, for me, part of a broader community, and that DVD commentaries are a way of broadening participation in a movie and knowledge of the movie, and making it part of a broader culture.
Well, let's broaden that argument out, because the public domain is one of the things, and I'm an artist, and I'm all for copyright and intellectual property rights. But I think the public domain has been so severely abused with the Mickey Mouse law, Sonny Bono, with the infamous grandson of James Joyce, Stephen Joyce, and his, I'm going to re-copyright this, and I'm going to change the commas to semicolons kind of text that came out every few years. So do you think that, for example, you mentioned Beckett. Now, obviously, Beckett died when, in the mid-50s or mid-60s?
It's been a while. I don't remember exactly, but 50 years or more.
So I guess his estate would have the ability to enforce that injunction against elaborations on his plays till probably middle or second half of this century. But there seems to be something basically wrong about that, and I think DVD commentaries got people more interested in it. Maybe it's only 5% of the actual public, but that's all you really need to keep something alive. I mean, the reason we know about, for example, Moby Dick is because there were some serious hardcore Melville fans that even in the half a century after his eclipse as a novelist, once the centenary of his birth came around, they were there to put out the centenary edition of Moby Dick. Do you think that's short-sighted, culturally speaking? The whole intellectual property rights and the things where people might object to DVD commentaries, rather than seeing it as a way to advance the work itself, because you can always go back to the original film, the original text.
Yeah, but you had lawsuits. Martin Scorsese and the Directors Guild were parts of them against. There was a company, and I can't recall the name of it, that wanted to basically bowdlerize some of his films and other films for home viewing with people who didn't want profanity or sex in the movies.
Oh well, yeah. I mean, but that's I would absolutely agree with Scorsese has a right to do that. I mean, that's the point.
Well, but what they were trying to do, I thought it was very interesting, was rent the film as his version.
Oh, okay.
Also with another version, so they that if people didn't want to have their children exposed to the one, they could use the other one. And at what point does something go then into the public domain? At what point does it belong exclusively to Scorsese? And when does it go into the public domain? And this is something that we've been, initially when the first copyright laws came into effect in 1710 in England, the copyright was for 13 years, renewable by the author for another 13. And you didn't have to copyright something. It could go directly into the public domain if you wanted it, much like our Creative Commons things now.
Yeah.
And after the 13 years, if you had sold the rights to a corporation or something, they would go back to you for that second 13 years, because you, the author, was the only person who could renew it. But now it's substantially longer than that, and it's going to get longer still as Mickey Mouse comes up to the end of its copyright period. It's going to be extended again.
Yeah, I hope not. I hope that I know this time there are some online organizations that are against that, because there's absolutely no way that Walt Disney, the individual or his company, I mean, should have control of Mickey. Mickey Mouse should not perpetually be unused, because when was the last time Mickey Mouse was culturally relevant? You know, I did a James Bond film show a few months back, and I hadn't seen any of the Daniel Craig versions. And at the day or two after, on a weekend, I saw on one of these old movie channels the first one. I think it was Quantum of Solace. It was horrible. And I look at all of these horrible superhero movies. I mean, I wonder what a young person, if they put together this sort of film fantasy thing of James Bond versus Batman, for example, how much better that would be than if the Broccoli family or the Marvel interests were able to do that. If Batman, which should be in the public domain, it would, even with the 56 years earlier, still only less than 50 years ago, it's still 56 years. Both Batman and James Bond would have long been in the public domain,
yes.
And they would still be relevant.
Yes, yes, and we don't allow that. We want that possessiveness. Hold things as tightly as possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's unfortunate. If we would let things loose too, you would have more DVD commentaries and other things, because you or I could sit down and create one.
Yeah.
And put it online with the movie rather than getting all the rights to it. Well, especially with an older film, with say something like Casablanca.
Right. I did
commentary might be great.
Right. I did a film noir show a couple of years ago, and I looked for all public domain film noirs, for example, and I used 2 or 3 minute clips from the 5 or 6 films that I found online. I stated they were public domain, and a company in Germany filed a thing in YouTube against me for copyright infringement. What the hell does a company in Germany have the rights to? I believe it wasn't the Maltese Falcon, but I think it was something that had Bogey in it from the 30s. It's just insane, and it just, to me, it makes no sense. Just because they can be streamed in Germany, but this is YouTube for you, so I don't have any clips other than stuff that is produced, like speaking to you, in any of my shows now, and I think it's poorer because of it.
I think you're right. I think we're all poor because of it. And if you wanted to see a real, genuine film culture build, it would have to build on a public domain.
Yeah.
And that public domain isn't being allowed. And the companies, I think, would ultimately benefit, but they don't know it. They're too short-sighted to see the long term. They don't understand the long-term value of what they've got.
Yeah. Well, let's return more directly to commentaries, and let's look at historically speaking. I mentioned how Warner Brothers had released a few packs, maybe 3 or 4, 6 or 7, 8 packs of gangster films, and they had, I think Leonard Maltin was the host of the whole thing, although he did maybe only 1 or 2 commentaries, and the others were done by other experts on the films or the actors. And I thought they were very good, generally speaking, because they gave you a historical background. They did pay attention to the scene. They didn't just talk from their notes over a vital scene. So I'd asked this earlier, but if you could, are there 3 or 4 people that you might think of who give the best commentaries in terms of a historical background, in terms of the cultural setting of film? If you're doing a film noir about, let's say, I know Bogart, or what's the famous the film where the guy pushes the old woman down the stairs? What's his name? The great film noir. I can't name, but you know what I'm saying. Who do you think were some of the really stellar commentarians?
I don't know. It's more than I said before. Now, this is something actually that I thought about, in the sense that I thought that the DVD commentary could become a new form for film scholarship, actually, where then film scholars could work and talk directly with the movie as they were doing this, or certainly with extended clips.
Yeah.
But I think focusing on a specific movie, they really could have done something. And as you said, Leonard Maltin was he was right at the center of a lot of the early things on that. But I don't know who I would say would be the best of them, again, because the ones that I liked the best tended to be, because I don't think very many real film scholars got into doing this. And the people who were doing it often were, I think you were saying, often doing it by rote.
Yeah.
We're just reading something rather than interacting with the movies themselves.
It would be like, hi, I'm film scholar. This film was made in 1931. Or, you know, this was at the end of Fatty Arbuckle's career. It was after his famous blah, blah, blah. And they'd go on for 10 minutes about Fatty Arbuckle, what happened to end his career. And they'd miss, you know, the exposition of the film.
Well, they were missing what the possibilities were that they could do. They weren't watching the movie. As you said, it was scripted beforehand. And it'd be fine to have notes and to be an expert on it, but to really be interacting with the movie, that's the whole point of having the DVD commentary. You know, why watch it? Why not just read this person's commentary as an article or something? Why watch it? Watch the movie while you're doing this, unless there's a real interaction with the movie. Yeah,
because I don't think VHS tapes were that bad, for example, visually. Yes, they could get screwed up in the machine more easily than a DVD could get scuffed, but I don't think people bought DVDs initially in the mid-90s or whatnot, whenever they first came out, because they were so vastly superior to VHS. I think it was the extras that got
the
people.
Extras. Yeah. And the size, too, that you could have so many more of them than you could. Your collection of videotapes would take up a lot of space. Your collection of DVDs, what is it, about a quarter of the space?
Yeah.
That's a big difference.
Yeah. And I guess Blu-rays haven't really saved the day for DVDs. They just came on and whatnot. Well, let me wrap things up then and just ask you then, what are you going to be working? Because anyone, and I'll link to your Wikipedia page and your DVD Revolution book page on Amazon. But are you still as interested in film culture, or because you have quite a broad palette that you've written about? What is on your plate? What is your next book or your next whatever that's coming up?
I'm working on a book I've got a book coming out actually on. It's a collection of essays by other people. I have a couple of them in it on the sitcom from I Love Lucy to Modern Family, 25 essays on influential sitcoms. And I'm pretty interested in that. And as I think Andrew Egan was saying, that may be where the sitcom, in particular, the DVD commentary might be going. Yeah. But I'm working on a number of things. Another a look at the 1960s popular culture and a bunch of different projects. Looking at working right now on an article on Arkham Asylum from the DC Comics, and wherever my interest goes, I'll follow it.
Well, I did last year or the year before even, I did a show on what I considered the top 10 sitcoms of all time, and I think all of them were before 1980. Maybe I had one from the 1980s. Let me just ask you then, just broadening out from DVDs, just before we end this. I've often, I bristle at the notion when I hear people talking now about the golden age of TV, because when I look back at the Mary Tyler Moores and the Bob Newharts and the Norman Lears, and the great sitcoms there. And then I look back, too, even at some of the hour-long dramas from the 60s or 70s. Not that there weren't some bad ones, but I don't see this as a golden age at all. I just turn the dial, and I don't have cable, but when I've been at work and I've turned stuff, or when I've found it on Netflix, I mean, Mad Men, for example, was good the first 3 seasons. The next 2 seasons, it was not nearly as good, and I haven't even watched the last 2 seasons of it. It seems to me that we have only double the population, but we've got something like 100 times as many outlets. So I don't see that the creative element of Hollywood or whatnot, you're thinned out. You're not going to have all the great names and great people that were working on the Mary Tyler Moore show. You're only going to have maybe 1 out of the 10 great writers that you had there working on modern sitcoms. Do you look at this as the golden age of TV? Because I don't.
I think it's a golden age in the sense that there's much more than there was. There's more outlets, more possibilities. I'm not sure that there's any better than it's been in the past. In the science fiction world, for a long time, there was argument about when the golden age of science fiction was. And somebody effectively ended that by saying, and I think it's really true, the golden age of science fiction is 12.
Yeah.
And I think that the golden age of television is just as personal as the golden age of science fiction. That there's no particular age that's going to be any greater than any other.
Well, on that note, I will end this, and I want to thank you and also Andrew Egan, who was here earlier. So thank you for spending an hour or so talking about this.
Oh, my pleasure. I've enjoyed it, and good luck with this and anything else that you're going to be doing.